And so I am going to get us started. I think we've got most people have kind of joined in. There might be a few stragglers, but all of our judges are here. All of our participants are here. And so we are ready to go. Hello, everybody. My name is Heather Williams. I'm a lecturer in the Defense Studies Department and the Center for Science and Security Studies at King's College London. My co-host today is Professor Wynne Bowen, who is the head of the School for Security Studies. I'm going to get things kicked off, and then Wynne's going to take over a bit later on. I know that everyone is a Zoom expert by now. Just a reminder for our judges and finalists, please make sure to mute yourself unless you're speaking. Remember to unmute yourself when you're ready to talk. And also please keep your videos on. This is the first ever arms control idol competition. It was designed kind of based off of the policy idol competition that's held by King's College London every year. Our goal for today was to encourage truly creative thinking into the future of arms control, to support early career researchers who might have some innovative ideas but don't always have a platform, and to engage with the big, diverse arms control community all over the world. Our finalists and judges truly reflect that global reach, and we're so grateful to you all for joining. I'm going to do some extremely quick introductions, but the email that you were all sent earlier today, which had the Zoom link to join, it also includes a link at the bottom with their full bios. So our judges, in rapid order, we have Professor Li Bin, who is a professor of international relations at Tsinghua University. General Yevgeny Bujinsky, who is vice president of the Russian International Affairs Council and has done work with the Peer Center. Dr. Renata Dwan is the director of UNIDIR. Very happy to have you here. Ambassador Marjolijn Van Deelen is the EU Special Envoy for Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. And last but not least, Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins is the founder and executive director of Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security. She has an incredibly distinguished career working arms control at the US State Department. Our finalists include Thomas Cheney, who is a lecturer in space governance at the Open University. Jakob Hake is a co-founder of Politish, which is a current affairs website, and also an alum of King's College London. Haneen Khalid is an Obama Foundation scholar, and she recently completed her graduate studies at the University of Chicago. John Tishman is a U.S. Army infantry captain, currently completing his Master's of Science and International Relations. And then last we have Johanna Trittenbach, who works at Facing Finance, which is an NGO that coordinates with the campaign to stop killer robots. So these are the 10 experts and early career experts that you will be hearing from. The process for getting here, so we had incredible applications for people to join this competition. These 5 were selected based on creativity, clarity of their ideas, and consideration of diverse perspectives. Those will be the same criteria going forward for today's competition. The selection committee of finalists included myself, Lyndon Burford, Amelia Morgan, Alexandra Bell, Tom Plant, Dooyeon Kim, and Andre Bolkutsky. And I know some of them have called in. Thank you all so much for helping us get to this point. Following their selection, the finalists were paired with an expert mentor who helped them prepare for this event. And those mentors included Pranay Vadi, Tong Zhao, Tanya Ogilvie-White, Elaine Bunn, and Ed Reed. Thank you all, because I think almost all of you are here, which is really great to see. The running order. So how is today going to go? As you can probably tell, this is going to be very fast. We are on a really tight time schedule. Each finalist will give a 5-minute pitch of their idea for the future of arms control. We're going to go through them in alphabetical order. After the pitch, the judges will have 5 minutes to ask them questions. So since time is tight for the finalists and anyone watching, once you have 30 seconds left, I'm going to go like this, and then 20 seconds, and then 1 second, and then I'm just gonna go like this when it's time for you to stop. After all the finalists have presented, the judges and I are gonna move to a different room for the deliberations. And during that time, Professor Bowen is going to poll all of you. You will be asked to vote on which of the speakers you found to be the most engaging, and the audience winner also gets a prize. Additionally, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of Zoom, which hopefully you can all see. So towards the end, or as we go along, please do ask questions. If there's a specific point that you want someone to expand upon, put it in the Q&A box, and Professor Bowen will draw on these after the polling. Once the judges have decided on a runner-up and first place, we'll all come back together and Professor Bowen will announce the winners. We will be finishing promptly at 4:30, if not sooner. Again, some people are staying up really late for this. Final bits of housekeeping. As you probably noticed, the session is being recorded, just so you know. And then the final kind of point I just want to make is to thank at the outset just the incredible team at CSSS that made this all possible. So Isabel Lucio, Hannah Mulvey, Erin Connolly, and most especially Emily Enright, who's just been a huge champion of this initiative from the beginning. And so last thing for me to do is to say good luck to all of our finalists. We're all really excited to hear what ideas you have for the future of arms control. And so to get us started will be Thomas Cheney. Thomas, please give us your 5-minute pitch.
Thank you, and hello. Space debris is one of the major issues currently facing the space environment. An anti-satellite weapons test represents one of the generators of much dangerous space debris. As a result, ASATs threaten the sustainability of the space environment, and this includes space-based arms control endeavors. As we saw with the 2007 Chinese ASAT test, which proved to be a watershed for recognizing the threat of space debris, debris generated by the intentional destruction of space objects can have a long life, and indeed the Chinese test continues to threaten space operations to this day. As we were reminded last year with the Indian ASAT test in the early spring, which again saw space debris resulting from that test lingering about in orbit longer than was anticipated. It's becoming increasingly clear that one of the key things we need to do in space governance is to mitigate and indeed actively remove space debris. Therefore, it is clear that the intentional destruction of space objects is at odds with responsible behavior in outer space. Therefore, we need an ASAT test ban treaty, and we need it now. This is a modest proposal, but it is achievable, and perhaps more importantly, verifiable. Granted, there are definition issues. ASAT is a mission, not a specific weapon. And commercial debris removal, as well as on-orbit servicing, are inherently dual-use capabilities, which further muddle the issues. Additionally, the physics of orbit mean that potentially anything in orbit could be a weapon, given the speeds involved. Therefore, it's important to focus on the destruction of space objects themselves, as destruction of an object in orbit is relatively harder to hide, particularly given the proliferation of open source and indeed even commercial space situational awareness efforts. When you combine this with the transparency and confidence building measures being proposed by the commercial sector, then this makes this an effort that is reasonably possible to conceive of achieving. Further, most major actors in outer space have now conducted an ASAT test of their own, meaning that they don't need to prove that they have the capability to do this operation. Yet there are other potential states, such as, say, the UK or France, who may yet feel the need that they need to prove that they can belong to this club, an action which needs to be dissuaded, such as a test ban would help do. Furthermore, renouncing conducting of testing, particularly destructive testing, is not renouncing the capability itself. And it is important to recognize that the ability to destroy command and control infrastructure located in outer space is a legitimate military activity in wartime. We are seeing an increasing desire for space arms control and indeed formal rules for outer space, military activities in outer space. Indeed, we've recently seen the UK call for a UN General Assembly resolution on such efforts. This was supported by the United States, and we've previously seen efforts by the Russians and the Chinese calling for formal binding rules for military behavior in outer space. However, the details of these things are often quite contentious and needs to be worked out. Therefore, an ASAT test ban treaty would represent an early win which could open the door for future more ambitious efforts. We saw how this worked in the nuclear field. The 1963 test ban treaty opened the way for more ambitious and broader arms control initiatives. This is particularly important given the fact that arms control and indeed the international order are in kind of a bad state at the moment, and getting some people around the table to have an agreement on something important would be a useful restorative project. Space forces are preparing for war. We hear that all the time. Space debris is a big issue and becoming an increasingly important issue. An ASAT test ban treaty therefore represents a perfect first step for protecting the space environment. Further, we don't necessarily need to wait for the great powers to take action. Indeed, we've seen that, it was New Zealand and Germany that led the condemnation of the Indian test at the UN COPUOS in Vienna last year. And we've seen grassroots efforts with the Landmine Treaty and the recent nuclear weapons ban treaty be reasonably successful. So we don't need to wait for the United States or Russia to take action in order to move the ball forward. Finally, an ASAT test ban treaty would help to create a positive atmosphere for space arms control. It would be a good win for arms control in general. It would actively help reduce space debris, and it would help preserve the principle of peaceful uses of outer space. The time is now right for such a measure. The desire is there and growing, and we need to present future tests and help to preserve the space environment for the exciting future activities that are being planned for outer space. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Thomas, and sticking well within the time constraints. So we'll now turn it over to the judges, and with and Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins gets the first question. Bonnie.
Great, thank you, Thomas. I really appreciated your paper, and I do like that you state that the major powers have all tested an ASAT capability, reducing their need to prove that they have it, which there's always a question about when arms control starts. And a lot of times it's after countries have already realized, okay, I got what I want, now I can think about reducing it. So I like that. How would you say a little bit more, and you've had some good rationales, but if I'm France, I mean, convince me, very briefly, because we don't have a lot of time, I know. Why do I need to do this? If, there still might be a reason why I may want to do more things.
Well, I think the European countries in particular, through both the European Space Agency and the European Union, European states have sort of been leading the way on responsible behavior initiatives, particularly around space debris. So it seems somewhat hypocritical of them to be pro-civil debris initiatives and then say, yeah, but we can still blow up space objects whenever we want. But more broadly, the civil uses of space, which are particularly threatened by space debris, are quite important for a huge number of states, and they should recognize that they're like their own self-interest in not destroying this environment.
Great, thank you. Good first question to get us started. Marjolijn Van Deelen, you get the next question.
All right, well, thank you very much, and a compliment, Thomas, on a very good presentation. Testing is very often a show of strength for countries. You link testing to the issue of space debris, the difficulties with that. But you can, of course, also test without actually destroying anything in space. How would you deal with that?
Absolutely. I think non-destructive tests, maybe, again, picking up on the first step nature, that not necessarily encouraging non-destructive tests, but recognizing that non-destructive tests are more responsible than destructive tests. It may be that we accept that the space debris is the key issue, so let's focus on that first. And much as, again, to hark back to the nuclear issue, it was recognized that atmospheric testing was the main environmental problem that needed to be tackled before we dealt with some of the other issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Renata Dwan, next question.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And I like the fact that you navigated the issue of verifiability as such a challenge for arms control. But really just a question to you, who would verify this treaty? Because you said there's lots of different actors, but who would be the authoritative body to verify whether a ASAT test had taken place?
That's yes. I mean, hopefully the United Nations could fulfill that role. I mean, I know that the Office for Disarmament Affairs takes a keen interest in space security issues. Data will always be a problem, but as we've seen in the civil space world now, there's plenty of people. Now that we've got more people looking up at it, everybody sort of announces something has happened. As we've seen with US, Russian, and indeed recently Chinese so-called secret spaceplane actions. Basically everybody says there's something weird going on in orbit. So I think that the issue is more somebody taking an action as a result of that data rather than getting the data itself.
Thank you. And next question might have to be our last is Yevgeny Buzinski. If you could ask the question, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas, for your idea. It's not new, but is it about debris, space debris, or is it about arms control? So if it's about space debris, it's understandable. If it's about arms control, I'm puzzled why only ASAT. Why not prohibit deployment in space of all kinds of weapons? That would be easier and easier to verify, by the way. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think debris is the biggest concern because it's quite cross-cutting. More weapons gets into sort of trickier conversations that we want to have about the legitimacy of military activities in outer space. And so that's why I think they're saying, making the emphasis that this is a first step and not the only step.
Great, thank you. And so that was our first 5 minutes and came in right on time. So thank you to all the judges, and thank you to Thomas for showing us how it's done and getting us all started. This is exactly what we were hoping for. So now, turning to our second pitch and idea for the future of arms control will be Jakob Hake. So Jakob, over to you for 5-minute pitch.
Thank you, Heather. Numerous internationally agreed upon norms call on states not to target critical infrastructure using their cyber capabilities. But in the last 5 years, there have been several cyber attacks disrupting critical infrastructure, demonstrating their potentially destructive impact. These types of attacks also have the potential to contribute to further escalation between states. Unfortunately, cyber arms control has proved elusive, and attempting to ban or restrict numbers of certain weapon systems is highly unlikely to be effective for regulating cyber weapons. Their intangible nature and a lack of international consensus on key concepts are just two of the challenges to this type of approach. I'm now going to take you through my proposal, which approaches cyber arms control by thinking about targets and the impact of cyber attacks, and aims to create a foundation to tackle the targeting of critical infrastructure. The Cyber Convention on Critical Infrastructure, as I've called it, would have its signatories agree to make political commitments to not target two types of critical infrastructure using their cyber capabilities. The first is civilian critical infrastructure, the definition of which was deliberately kept broad due to the large number of potentially applicable sectors and to avoid portraying some targets as legitimate by exclusion. The second is nuclear command and control systems. Specifying nuclear command and control is aimed at clarifying state strategies. Experts in Russia and China, for example, have used the ambiguity of American strategy on this matter to justify hawkish approaches and fuel worst-case scenario thinking. The commitment declared in the convention could help delegitimize these arguments. As a result, the convention should be appealing to countries like Russia and especially China and India, as the latter two place value on declaratory principles shown by their no first use policy for nuclear weapons. It may be appealing to the US by disincentivizing adversaries from targeting its own nuclear command and control. As such, the convention's commitment to not target nuclear command and control systems could be a first step to building confidence between nuclear weapon states over this issue, and offering greater clarity of strategic approaches. Nuclear weapon states could further build on the convention by discussing what constitutes nuclear command and control. The convention tries to take a step forward from past norms that deal with critical infrastructure as a singular category. Although a committee or mechanism for attribution could be created to monitor violations of the convention, this would likely prove politically unfeasible, which is why I would exclude it from the convention. Instead, signatories would agree to explore creating a group of independent experts from the private sector. If states' critical infrastructure is targeted through cyber attacks, they could request support from this group, but this help is not an obligation. The convention also calls on private sector companies to explicitly declare that they will not support states targeting civilian critical infrastructure, acknowledging the role of the private sector in cyberspace. Negotiation of the convention's text should be open to all states, but the European Union could take a leading role as it has increased its cyber diplomacy engagement in recent years and expressed support for similar measures. The advantage of this is that the EU may be seen as a more neutral player in the context of increased geopolitical rivalry between the US, Russia, and China. Overall, the convention offers several benefits for improved international security. The agreement could reduce the likelihood of potentially disruptive attacks on critical infrastructures that are crucial for the effective functioning and safety of society. By consensus, the international community could designate this type of attack as unacceptable. This may be particularly important as more states develop their offensive cyber capabilities. By committing not to target nuclear command and control, the convention can help clarify state strategies and reduce worst-case scenario thinking, helping to build confidence between nuclear weapon states. For private sector companies, the convention would be an opportunity to demonstrate their independence from governments, which could help improve consumer and government confidence in them. This is a challenging issue, but my proposal has attempted to consider key perspectives and offered concrete first steps to take. The Cyber Convention on Critical Infrastructure provides a platform for increased cooperation and dialogue in the rapidly changing field of cyber arms control, and could facilitate safer societies through its protection of critical systems. Thank you.
Thank you. Another great example of timekeeping. That should get us started for great Q&A. First question is Marjolijn Van Deelen.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you very much, Jakob. And I really like the way how you have made your convention also open to other stakeholders and states. That's a really interesting aspect. I'm a bit confused about what you mean by critical infrastructure. On the one hand, you speak of civilian infrastructure, and on the other hand, there's nuclear command and control. Could you explain why you combine those two in your convention and how they would relate to each other? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I chose these two areas, the first, civilian critical infrastructure, because I thought this has sort of humanitarian value that could appeal to all states, particularly in the current context. I think worst case scenarios people talk about a lot is cyber attacks disrupting the functioning of a hospital, for example. So thinking about those sorts of targets where it's civilians that would be most affected. And nuclear command and control, I think, would pretty clearly not fall under the category. But I chose this specifically looking at sort of some of the definitions countries have for critical infrastructure. They often include military, like the military sector or defense industry. But I think talking about nuclear command and control, you focus on something that where there's a lot of risk for potential escalation or miscommunication or sort of accidents through by targeting it through cyberspace, and thinking specifically as well about this issue of America's left of launch capability that they've stated, and that's been interpreted and is, I think, rightfully seen as somewhat ambiguous. So helping to clarify that issue.
Great, thank you. Next question, Renata Dwan.
So thank you for that, Jakob. And Marjolijn stole my question, actually, about definitions of civilian critical infrastructure. And I think that is a really interesting topic. I'm going to maybe focus on your proposal that the EU would be an appropriate actor to negotiate this treaty. You say that it's a cyber diplomacy presence and that it might be seen as to be between the US and Russia. But it's a group of member states and it constitutes with its own legal identity. So how would a group of states around the world or individual states look on that? And what would be the incentives for states who are very protective of their sovereignty to come under the leadership of a regional multilateral body like the EU?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's definitely a valid concern. I chose the EU, especially in mind, sort of particularly recently. It's taken more steps to be more active in this sort of field with the sanctioning of, I think, North Korean and Russian hackers for example. And obviously, I think you would need to reach some consensus there, and that might be difficult to do. But I think if, for example, the US or Russia or China proposed this sort of treaty, it would be easier for the others to sort of reject it outright due to the more adversarial nature between them. And as well, I think the EU as a sort of international player, I think maybe has the weight to compete with these bigger countries.
Thank you. And next question, again, it might be a little tight on time. Lee Bin, we will get to you for the when we go around. General Buzinski, a question from you, please.
Thank you, Jacob. The issue of cybersecurity is extremely acute, but the main difficulty with the treaty or convention on cybersecurity is a profound difficulty to determine the source of attack, state or non-state. How could you solve this difficulty?
Well, thank you. I think you're absolutely right. Attribution of an attack is extremely difficult, and while I think a lot of the time you can get very close, it's essentially impossible to attribute an exact source. That's why I said I think this issue should be included, and it should instead be more sort of thinking in terms of norms and just in terms of behavior. So I think admittedly that's a big flaw, but attribution itself could be politically just, I don't think would work because it would be too contentious of an issue.
And we have to stop it there. Again, my apologies for confusion about the ordering, but we will keep going around and everyone will get to ask questions. So our next pitch will be from Haneen Khalid. Haneen, 5 minutes, over to you, please.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning, afternoon, evening. Arms control is a process that affects us all, whether we're fighting on the battlefield or sitting at home on our couch. We're all part of a security infrastructure intended to keep all of us safe. We're living in a time when agreements between states are unraveling. In an era of climate change, global pandemic, and heightened nuclear risk, we must look to the future to find hope and plant seeds for a system that really does make us safer. Countries with massive missiles pointed at each other may have trouble building the trust and cooperation needed to carry us forward through the issues of this time. Young people not only represent the future, but have the responsibility of shepherding us through the turbulence and uncertainty that it brings. Many people here today have worked tirelessly to shape and maintain international relations and avoid disaster, including Dr. Heather, our phenomenal judges, and many people in the audience. It is up to us to carry that forward. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference is right around the corner. Happening every 5 years, it is the only abiding framework bringing the international community together to reduce risk from nuclear weapons and provide an opportunity to think about response to nuclear disaster. These are hard questions because major nuclear accidents in previous decades, including Chernobyl and Fukushima, faced prolonged complications due to documented challenges in disaster response. Our infrastructures were simply too overstretched to cope at that time, and we're still feeling the effects today. And yet, if those infrastructures had not been in place, the fallout might have been even more unimaginable. In light of issues discussed, I propose a model arms control negotiation, a bit like a model UN, as a side event at this conference. Held in partnership with civil society organizations, the event will recruit international participants to randomly represent 20 nuclear and non-nuclear states. The exercise will involve teams of youth voices and both educate and be educated by their perspective. Countries can be divided by region to undertake a timed negotiation simulation facing a specific problem. This, I propose, could be a single use of nuclear weapons in a politically charged altercation with international consequences. Given both brief training and access to mentors, much like we're doing here now, the teams will negotiate a subset of issues resulting from this incident as though they were real representatives of the countries involved. They will have special instructions to observe both the responsibility of the international community in this moment, as well as the challenges that may arise in the process of implementing or providing these solutions. These could include medical or economic aid or political fallout, depending on the extent of the damage. It will include an assessment of what went wrong and what could have been avoided. Throughout the simulation, complex developments may be introduced to the situation for participants to respond to as it evolves in real time, such as in a real nuclear disaster. Participants would have the opportunity to think through urgent first steps and also respond in a more medium-term timeframe. They would be asked to document the challenges that may arise. These findings will first be presented to a panel of civil society and international judges, again, much like what we're doing here today. The judges will provide feedback based on the effectiveness of disaster management, the scope of issues identified in the process, and the practical value of proposed solutions. It's also important to take into account a diversity of perspectives. The teams will then refine their findings into a report titled "The Opportunities and Challenges in Formulating a Nuclear Disaster Response, a Youth Perspective," to be widely disseminated in partnership with civil society orgs, funders, and youth groups, and delivered to international delegations attending the NPT ReviewCon. Both the model arms control negotiation and the report may be funded by donors in the nuclear security space, looking to broaden the field with diverse voices, perspectives, and international participation, which are all elements that define this project. I hope this exercise helps strengthen cooperation under the NPT. Our purpose here is both to create ideas, but also demonstrate that nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states have common global challenges that they need to be facing together. The day after planning can help highlight the risks of nuclear use and hopefully motivate greater reductions. This may also help provide a fresh angle for NPT discussion during 2021. To conclude, this exercise will establish a lasting pipeline between seasoned and new voices and has the flexibility and structure to be expanded after a pilot run. The model can be used to simulate different kinds of arms control negotiations with impactful results for both outreach and substantive suggestions for experts to use. It is also a long-term exercise for generating and sustaining interest in the field at large and cultivating awareness, education, and responsible decision-making amongst participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Haneen, and for a very concise and thoughtful presentation. First question is to Renata Dwan.
Well, thank you, Haneen. And of course, working for the UN, I always love if anyone proposes anything like the Model UN or any format. But as I read your proposal, and listening to your pitch now, I guess my question would be this. In a world in which we see arms control as a declining feature of university syllabi and educations and systems, what would you think, what would be the knowledge that young people would need to bring into this process? What sorts of skills or knowledge would they need to know about, and where might they find that?
I think that's a wonderful question, thank you. I think a lot of the skills required for negotiation and hard skills and debate and critical thinking and being able to look at the world from a sort of like, being able to zoom in and zoom out in different regions. And, of course, I feel you would understand that far more than I do working at the UN, but, I think those are very, very important skills that are transferable between different areas of work. And I think arms control as a declining field is one where they're needed more than ever before. And if we can attract the youth to sort of, transfer some of that attention towards this, I think we'd all feel the benefits from that.
Thank you. Yevgeny Buzinski, a question from you, please.
Thank you. I must be absolutely frank. I didn't fully understand what do you mean by your proposal. You see, arms control negotiations, especially dealing with nuclear weapons, are too sensitive from the viewpoint of national security. Actually, do you propose to make them more public? Please, maybe I didn't get the gist of your proposal. Thank you.
Thank you for your question and for giving me an opportunity to clarify a little bit. I think the idea is to enable young voices to participate in exercises that would be similar to what they would participate in once they come to a stage where they are doing this in real, as real negotiators and as real diplomats. It's a simulation exercise to allow them to do like a test run and understand different perspectives, the role of different nations, and in a game kind of an exercise, in preparation for doing this in kind of like real life. So in my experience, and from what I've heard talking to different people who've been involved in similar exercises, what I understand is it can be a really fruitful exercise to understand what are the views that different countries represent, what are some of the sensitive issues that they may need to consider once they come into those roles as full-time practitioners in the diplomatic space, and sort of enable them to just do that job better once they're in those roles. I hope that addresses your question.
Thank you.
Sorry all, Heather Williams' internet just froze, so I'm going to take over. We'll move on to Professor Lee Ben for the next question, please.
Thank you. I guess the idea, the proposal is to cultivate grassroots arms control supporters in the next generation. So I personally believe that this is a very constructive idea, and it should generate a lot of influences in the next generation. My question is, if you have any idea how we could make this approach more effectively in different cultures. In some societies, people are more comfortable with negotiations. In some other societies, people are less. So I wonder if you have any idea to make this approach, effective in different cultures. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really wonderful question, and I think a key point in international negotiations as they play out in in a real situation as well. And I think that's why it's just so important to bring young people in and start them off early. And some of my work in the past has focused on this, and South Asia and the U.S. and sometimes in Japan, different parts of the world which have different negotiating styles. And I do believe that encouraging young people to interact with each other and become more familiar with those negotiating styles in a game situation or in a simulation will help them be prepared for when they have to really have a seat at the real table and understand with some kind of cultural sensitivity and respect how they can really be most effective in those negotiation processes. So I think it's also a training exercise in that regard and a learning exercise in that regard. And I think it's very important. So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Haneen. Very thoughtful again in the Q&A. We'll move on now to our next participant. So we've got John Tishman coming up next. Take it away, John.
Thank you, Emily. Greetings. My proposal for arms control IDLE is aimed at the development of trust between Russia and the United States at the tactical level of war. Rather than seeking to renegotiate or begin anew, treaties revolving around arms control for strategic or theater missile systems, both states should seek to enter into lower level political arms control arrangements in order to reestablish trust and provide a jumping off point for future negotiations. By starting at the tactical level, focusing on emerging and disruptive technologies, both states can accomplish three goals. First, it addresses the real world shared security concern, reducing the risk of vertical escalation, particularly in proxy conflicts. Second, it establishes trust and verification methodologies that can be expanded upon easily with subsequent arrangements. Third, it provides the most flexibility for other states to join the political arrangement by making each focus on individual weapon systems. Political arms control arrangements at this level would reduce the risk of rapid vertical escalation. Emerging disruptive technologies are in the process of being mass produced to the point that their distribution to third-party states or proxy forces will soon become plausibly deniable, risking further escalation. By eliminating the ability to provide disruptive technology to proxy forces, there would be greater negotiation room for future agreements whilst removing a potential destabilizing factor. The proliferation of self-guided anti-tank missile systems are likely the most disruptive technology that will create significant escalation risk at the proxy level conflict in the near term. Second generation anti-tank guided missile technology has proliferated since the 1970s. However, their bulk, lack of portability, and guidance trajectory have limited their use by non-state actors and proxy forces. That is until the covert action, Timber Sycamore, supplied tow missile systems to rebel forces in Syria, where these systems would have devastating effects on the Syrian Arab army. The escalatory effect, even of these outdated systems that they can wreak is obvious. Third generation systems, spearheaded by the US Army's Javelin missile, are a technological leap forward that are not yet available to most states unless purchased by either the US or Russia. With newer variants even further reduced in weight and increasing range to 4,000 meters, these systems would have devastating effects if proliferated to proxy forces. The proliferation of US Javelin or a Russian variant missile system to proxy forces would have huge escalatory implications for any theater either country is currently engaged in. Imagine the first Battle of Grozny if Chechen rebels were able to effectively attrit armored columns prior to entering the city, rather than merely waiting until Russian forces entered en masse. Or the Battle of Fallujah, with Marine units attrited by insurgents from the relative safety of the far bank of the Euphrates River, rather than relying solely on improvised explosive devices and short-range anti-tank grenades. Granting the ability to proxies to engage in state military forces at extreme range with these systems completely changes force ratio calculations, compelling state militaries to escalate with increased troop levels to meet larger attrition rates. The US already in places strict controls on the sale of its Javelin missiles through its international trafficking in arms regulations. Though a comparable Russian system has not yet made it to market, it can be assumed that development is underway and control requirements will be similar. Neither party wants this advanced technology offloaded or lost to competitor countries for the development of countermeasures. Therefore, it is in both states' interest to agree politically to implement controls on these systems similar to the Wassenaar arrangement. As the technological and cost tipping point moves closer to other states' indigenous development of similar systems, they can be added to the arrangement. An agreement for this disruptive technology does not immediately meet the need of strategic arms control, but rather provides an initial framework for limiting of other disruptive technologies that can be built into a web of arrangements with other states joining as they advance technologically. An analysis of treaty agreements with Russia has demonstrated that this methodology of treaty nesting is preferable, with the majority of Russian bilateral treaties nested, each containing language referencing and contingent upon previous treaty arrangements. Beginning at the tactical level here, where both states have the opportunity cost by giving up the ability to escalate proxy conflict, while not losing out on revenue generated from state military sales, would demonstrate trust that can be referenced by arms control negotiators for other tactical and operational level technologies. It would provide the opportunity to maintain arms control skills in both states, helping to develop relationships between a new generation of arms control negotiators, while also creating a verification regime that could be expanded upon as further technologies nest on top of the original agreement. Once trust is built up enough and proxy forces remain a status quo, trust and confidence will be well established for re-engagement at the strategic level in subsequent years. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks John, very timely as well. So we'll move to our first question from General Blazinski, please.
Okay, so thank you for your proposal. I only wonder why you've chosen, well, I'm a practitioner, so from practical point of view, it's very difficult to limit kinds of weapons, starting from small arms or landmines, cluster munitions. We have a lot of examples. You spoke mainly about United States and Russia. We had an experience with man-pads. Do you know the story of Russian-American try to limit transfers of man-pads to non-state actors? Because you see, for the United States, there may be freedom fighters, for Russia, terrorists. Do you assess these well, circumstances in trying to reach some sort of arrangement on anti-tank missiles? Thank you.
Thank you, General. So the limiting factor would be classification of military forces by the Geneva Convention. So only handled and used by individuals categorized as actual uniformed military personnel. So that's typically how the United States sells the Javelin missile at present, through foreign military sales authorized by the International Trafficking in Arms Regulation, which requires specific control status of the weapon systems and the command launch unit in foreign countries. So the magazine and security process around the storage and then who's actually able to work the weapon is very limited. Russia would likely have a similar experience as they begin the sales process because of the extreme cost of these weapon systems. I think the last reference price tag I saw on the Javelin, the missile alone costs about $80,000, and the command launch units upwards of $300,000. So control of these systems as they're emerging is very important, and as the cost becomes reduced, as the technology proliferates and becomes easier to manage, the system will already be in place to control and ensure that they don't get offloaded into other countries.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Lee Bin, over to you.
Thank you. This is an export control issue. Sometimes a supplier sells the weapon to a sovereignty government, so that is legal. But the sovereignty government, the receiver, the government, breaks, it loses its, power, and then those missiles, get dispersed, by non-state actors. So my question is, Jonathan, what is your idea to avoid this problem? A national government receives such kind of missiles, and then the government, disappears, and then the missiles get, dispersed. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So the U.S. has had several issues with this. First, with the manpads during Operation Cyclone during the Russian Afghan war, and then also now with the tow missiles trying to recover them from Syria. Basically, we've noticed that when it's sold directly to independent or proxy forces, they tend to proliferate and get moved off. The actual collapse and recollection of equipment, we have some experience with this happening in Libya, but it would be a new issue. So maintaining funding probably built into the actual arrangement between countries for buyback programs, if they end up proliferating due to state collapse, would likely be a part of this agreement system.
Thank you. Bonnie Jenkins, a question from you.
Yes, well, actually, both of my questions were already covered because I had some of the same thoughts and concerns about the small arms and the non-state actor. I'm wondering, when it comes to small arms, there's a lot of issues regarding domestic, who's in the U.S., who's making money from a lot of the small arms and getting the right people on board. Talking about the Chemical Weapons Convention, for example, the reason why that was successful is because we had to get the chemical manufacturers involved. Have you thought about who are the domestic entities you would have to convince for this kind of a convention?
So the last contract I saw, it's all being executed by Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. So they're barred from selling it to other states or non-state actors automatically from the ITAR control. So it should be pretty minimal.
And we have to end it there. I'm glad that we got in that last question though, and good on your toes timing. And so thank you to everyone for the questions and your input so far. And so now we're gonna move on to our last pitch, which will be from Johanna Trittenbach. So Johanna, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. The world is facing rapid technological developments, which lead to increasingly complex weapon systems, and we find ourselves today on the brink of various new arms races. This is not a novelty, as the introduction of new weapons may always evoke strategic and humanitarian concerns and may also pose questions on the legality of such weapons. This is why I'm proposing today a new internationally binding instrument which will standardize the determination whether a new weapon is lawful. This measure will build trust through transparency, as it will set overarching standards for the legality of any new weapon. This measure is very much needed in times of deteriorating trust into international arms control and uncertainty of future military capabilities of states. States are already under an obligation by international law to review any new weapon system and to determine whether it is in compliance with international law. So if such an obligation already exists, then why do we need an additional international instrument? There are 3 reasons for that. First of all, there's virtually no transparency among states how they review new weapon systems, which standards and procedures are applied. Secondly, rapid technological developments and the complexity in weapon systems pose unprecedented questions to states and society. One example would be, how can adequate safeguards be employed in cyber capabilities in order to prevent any hacking? And third, it is our shared interest in the sense of a collective security approach that any new weapon system will be in compliance with international law. The internationally binding instrument that I'm proposing today therefore will add significant value to international arms control efforts, as it will build trust through transparency, and it will be structured along these 5 characteristics. First of all, the prohibitions of illegal weapon systems will be reiterated. These prohibitions are structured along the principles of international humanitarian law, which are the following. A weapon must not be indiscriminate. A weapon must not cause superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering. And a weapon must not cause severe, long-term, and widespread damage to the natural environment. In the drafting and negotiation process of this international instrument, states will have the opportunity to further elaborate on these principles, to specify and clarify them. The second characteristic of the instrument will be that it will impose positive obligations on states to conduct periodical testing and review of any new weapons, to insert a national focal point, which is the focal point for review of new weapons, and to issue annual reports on the standards and procedures that are employed in the review of new weapons. The third characteristic of the internationally binding instrument is that it will set up an international committee of experts, which will analyze the reports that are submitted by states and will enter into dialogue with states. The committee of experts will keep all information of national security confidential, but it will issue a publicly available summary report on the practical application of the standards and procedures that states use when they review new weapons. As a fourth characteristic, the international instrument will provide for transparency, information sharing, interstate capacity building, and it will also provide for the inclusion of civil society and the scientific community in the review process of new weapons. And finally, the last characteristic is that the international instrument will set up periodical meetings of states, parties, and other stakeholders where the challenges that are posed by emerging technologies can be discussed. This will also serve as a platform where any new necessary arms control or disarmament initiative can be discussed and even kickstarted. So in summary, a binding international instrument on the review of new weapons will build trust through transparency and will safeguard our future by setting international standards. Thank you very much for your interest. I'm looking forward to your questions, and at this point, I would also like to thank Tanya Olivi-White, who's been acting as my expert mentor in the Arms Control Idol. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna. So now for the Q&A, over to Lee Bin for the first question.
Thank you. The legality of a weapon depends on 2 major factors. One is the technical nature of the weapon. For example, chemical weapons, right? It's weapons of mass destruction. Another factor is the way of using the weapon. So any weapon could become illegal if we do not use the weapon in the right way. For example, if we shoot a rifle against civilians, that is illegal. So, so in the review, how can we make the judgment of the weapon legal or illegal, before we see the use of the weapon? Do you have any idea? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. So as my proposal is based on an existing obligation under international humanitarian law, I'll refer back to this obligation. It states that a weapon should be reviewed based on the ordinary circumstances and its ordinary use. So whereas international humanitarian law governs the means and methods of warfare, the means hereby are the weapons in themselves, and the methods are rather how they're used in order to gain advantage over the adversary. So to answer your question very precisely, the review process would focus on the ordinary use of the weapon, and then it would test whether the weapon is indiscriminate or causes superfluous injury, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, Bonnie Jenkins.
Hi, thanks for your proposal. I guess my question is just on a very practical one, which is there is a lot of needs for states to do reports and things like that. I think a UN Council Resolution 1540 and the obligation to send in information, do reports, things like that. And there's a lot of problems with that because a lot of countries just don't have the manpower to do these. This would be something else. Have you thought about how you can assist countries to actually live up to these obligations when you have many countries that are smaller who can't do the reports that are really required, and they'd have to do something else? I mean, is there something you can do to help them?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. My proposal also takes it into account when I said that the instrument will also provide for interstate capacity building. As a model, we could look at the Arms Trade Treaty and how the European Union, the US, or individual states are trying to build capacity with other states and help training. Yeah, so I would also point towards existing arms control regimes and the measures that are offered by them, where this new international instrument could dock on.
Thank you. Next question will be from Marjolijn Van Deelen.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Johanna, for a very good presentation. I've been wondering what would happen in one of the meetings of the states parties of your convention if one state does not agree with how another state has applied its standards. Then what?
Thank you for the question. I imagine the meetings of states parties really to be a platform for information sharing. So it will be a platform where states can discuss the standards that are being applied. Hopefully, they will continue their dialogue on how to test weapons, also in the sense of the common goods, especially thinking towards future military capabilities. For example, how to ensure the security of cyber weapons. If one state disregards with the standards of another one, then hopefully this one will be receptive. Because it will be in the interest of all states to secure such weapons. And therefore, I'm also placing much hope on the diplomats that are negotiating and also on the United Nations, which might potentially host that meeting, as well as on the International Committee of the Red Cross that could be involved.
And so speaking of the UN, we only have about 35 seconds left, but Renata Dwan, if you wanted to try to sneak in a question.
Okay, thanks. Very fast one, Johanna. Are you at risk of undermining the role of the ICRC as the holder of the Geneva Conventions of this proposal and its job to oversee Article 36 weapons reviews and guidance?
Thank you very much for the question. I think the ICRC should be involved as a major player in this convention. It might even be adopted under the auspices of the ICRC or in the framework of the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocol. And I hope that the ICRC would also welcome a proposal like this one. Thank you.
Thank you. So that wraps up the finalist presentations. Before the judges are whisked off, I just wanted everyone, even if you're a participant and you can't see or we can't see you, for everyone to just like have a little clap and just show so much appreciation for the finalists. This was really intense and pretty rapid fire, and you all held up amazingly under that pressure and fielded some really fascinating and difficult questions. So just, congratulations on your pitches and how you handled the Q&A. It really was quite impressive. So now to the judges, you will leave this Zoom room and then follow the link that we sent you to a different Zoom room where we will have a discussion about who our winner and runner-up will be. And Win, I'm going to turn it over to you to take out for the polling and some Q&A. But be right back, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are around the world. I think we've just had some fantastic presentations there. I think our judges have their work cut out for them. And I think if the future of arms control was dependent on ideas like this and enthusiasm like this, then arms control perhaps would have a brighter future than perhaps some people like to paint it at the moment. So we're now going to transition into the audience poll, and also we have an opportunity to pose some audience questions to the panel. And I've seen some questions already that have come in, but please pop some questions into the Q&A function if you have any questions you'd like to pose. So in terms of the poll, I do this quite a bit with some of my teaching. So I've been told that the poll is just ready to launch if I press poll, right? So we'll see what happens. So I'm pressing the poll. So this is about who did you find to be the most engaging speaker? So we're really interested in this poll to hear about the skill and the quality of the presentation, perhaps more than the substantive quality and SME subject matter expertise, if you will. So I'm going to launch the poll now and give people a little bit of time to put their results in. So hopefully people can see the poll, and I can see the poll moving, so that's good news, right? So I'm going to let that gather pace. And wait in awkward silence as you do on Zoom. And then we'll do some Q&A quickly. So we have 75% have voted, we're getting to the top. Going in the right direction, 70, 80, 80%. Do I hear any more? I feel like I should be in Sotheby's with my little gavel. So we're at 82%. Some people haven't voted yet. 84%, we're almost there. Stuck at 84%. I don't think I'm allowed to vote myself. I can't see a way to vote myself. Perhaps I should be able to vote, but there we go. Okay, we have got 83%. Poll's been open just over a minute. Any more takers? I'll leave it for another 20 seconds, then I'll close the poll. 85%. Just making some notes here. Okay, so I'm going to give you 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Oh, I'm going to stop it right there. Okay, good. Okay. The results of that poll will not be revealed to you now, unfortunately. So you're going to have to wait till the very end to hang on to see what happened. So we are basically, I've been trying to monitor the questions coming in. And so at the moment, I have got a question for all of the competitors. I've got a question myself for Haneen, but there's no question coming from Haneen. So I'm going to pose the first question to Thomas, and it's from Andrei Kursaru. And he talks about learning from the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. What obstacles do you envisage the ASAT treaty will face in terms of signatures and ratification for its entry into force? And how much does cybersecurity play a role in space systems and arms control? So Thomas, over to you.
I think for the first part of that question, the answer is, as is general, the US Senate and their general aversion to treaties, which may be why considering a non-treaty mechanism might be a way to go, at least at first, say a UN General Assembly resolution. As for cybersecurity, the answer is not enough. I think the space community are really starting to wake up to the dangers and threats posed by cybersecurity. So hopefully there will be more consideration of that effort in the future.
Okay. Thank you, Thomas. Okay, the next question I have is for Jakob. I'd like to see I'm going in order here. And this is from Jamie Kwong. So from Jamie, would focusing on nuclear command and control infrastructures incentivize states to, in brackets, further entangle conventional command and control systems with their nuclear systems? So Jakob, over to you.
Thank you for the question, Jamie. I think that's a valid concern, and like I mentioned in my proposal, sort of building onto the convention, it would be worth if states clarify or sort of reach an agreement on what exactly constitutes nuclear command and control for them. I think maybe a counterpoint to your question or that logic would be that if you further entangle the two, does that make your nuclear command and control potentially more vulnerable to other types of strikes that are just trying to target conventional command and control systems? It's maybe a counterpoint or question I could see coming from that.
Okay, thank you for that. So I do have a question now for Haneen. So Haneen, so how would your idea, this is from Dan Liu, how would your idea of a model UN style simulation on disarmament differ from current wargaming initiatives on nuclear and non-proliferation issues? So Haneen, please answer that one.
Thank you. That's a really interesting question. I think there's a lot to be learned from current wargaming initiatives, and then also room to maybe open up some of those exercises for a broader audience to participate and give them an opportunity to maybe, you know, take part in something that they haven't done before. And as I said in a previous comment, that maybe use some of their critical thinking and debate skills that they've been exercising in other contexts to address issues of non-proliferation and in the nuclear weapons space. So I guess that might be something that this initiative would try to focus on and prioritize. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Haneen. So a question for Jonathan from Nicholas Wanderer. Your proposal sounds a lot like the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty combined with a more strict Missile Technology Control Regime, MTCR. The same or similar hardware does not exist in several states. How would one state be compelled not to export it to groups aligned with its interests? What mechanism would compel this type of restraint?
Well, thank you, Nicholas, for that question. The International Trafficking in Arms Regulations has multiple categories of weapon systems, of which the Javelin missile falls into Category 1 and Category 3. Both categories have very specific requirements for storage, security, and as well as inspection by not only US personnel, but other individuals. So it needs to be inspected and can only be worked on by specific US contractors as part of the contract that gets sold. Likely Russia will be doing the same thing when they come out with their variant of the missile system. Because of the high cost at the moment, these things won't proliferate just because most states can't purchase them at the level of spending for their defense budgets. Similar to the way that the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, established the most wide-ranging inspection regime for 13 years after it was enacted, this would be a similar inspection regime, opening up the books of both states for their sales, as well as placement and security apparatus. So showing inventories between the two states would generate trust and then be able to work from that point on to further military equipment that is worrisome on the escalation ladder.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. And then we have a question for Johanna from Nicholas Wanderer. Again, international humanitarian law tends to, sorry, I thought I hadn't switched off mute then. International humanitarian law tends to govern use of weapons, generally not their existence. How do you reconcile the nature of weapons employment with the technological specifics of systems? For example, a discriminant weapon can be used indiscriminately. Johanna.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a bit similar to a question that I received earlier. So on the one hand, States are obliged under international humanitarian law to test new weapon systems already in the study, development, or acquisition phase, not only during their use. So prior to the use of weapons, their legality has to be reviewed. And now we come to the point which has already been asked to a certain extent. So the review process should focus on the ordinary use of weapon systems. So as you pointed out, a discriminate weapon can be used indiscriminately, but this should not be the subject of the review of a weapon system, but rather it's whether it in itself would be in line with existing international humanitarian law. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. Right, I'm going to go back into some of the questions here. So for Jakob, I've got a question from Andre Kusaru. With future emerging technologies, how can we limit their application in nuclear weapons to stop their quantitative proliferation? What are your thoughts on the application of artificial intelligence in terrestrial, naval, and aerial command and control systems? And Jakob.
Yeah, sorry. If you could clarify maybe a bit more what you mean by what emerging technologies you mean exactly, because I'm not sure I have an answer for you otherwise.
I think it's on my question, so I think let's assume it's AI, etc. Yeah?
AI. Well, I think I'm not sure if that would. I think you would have to have other negotiations or other treaties specifically for those technologies. I'm not sure they would fall under the scope of my proposal, since I think it was still quite broad in its ideas and is sort of more a stepping stone. So I think, yeah, you did that. I'm not sure my proposal would cover that sort of technology.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for the response. Okay, where's my questions gone? Right, so another question for Haneen here from Sophie McCormack. Brilliant idea, she says. How would you ensure voices involved were diverse and not the, in quotes, same youth voices? And how also would you mitigate against this process being trivialized and ensure participants gain empowering practical skills?
Thank you. So I think to address the second part of the question first, I feel like, given that we're attaching it to the NPT review conference for the first run, that might really help sort of bring home the enormity of the negotiations that are happening at that level and at that platform, and the importance of plugging in new voices and sort of creating that pipeline and, you know, getting new folks to sort of really experience that firsthand, to see how that process works, I think would really help in sort of driving home the seriousness and the importance of these proceedings. To the first part of your question in terms of diversity, I think that's really, really important. And some of the networks that I've been working in the past to organize, maybe not a similar model, but models or conferences where, you know, where diversity is a very important component. I think what we've really tried to do is, you know, spread as broad a net as we can, target as many youth groups as we can in as many parts of the world as we can, because I think one of the most important things here is not to, and I said this in my presentation as well, to not only be talking about nuclear weapon states, but also be talking to non-nuclear weapon states on a more equal footing. And I think sourcing young voices from both of these groups will sort of help bridge that gap a little bit and help perhaps address some of this concern. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Haneen. I have a question for Johanna from Sylvia Mishra, which goes: the review of new weapons would involve transparency, as you rightly mentioned in your proposal. what are the incentives for nuclear armed states to be more transparent when great power rivalry has only precipitated a focus on arms racing to develop emerging technologies to strengthen national security? Go ahead.
That's a very, very nice question. Thank you. And that was also, I believe, for me, the starting point of what do we need, looking at the emerging technologies that are being militarized at the moment. How can we prevent a militarization of technologies that will only be harmful for the whole world? And I believe that the answer to this is to be transparent among states on what basis they assess whether or not to develop a weapon and adopt a weapon into their military arsenal. And therefore, I'm hoping that states will realize that it is in the collective interest to be transparent about these standards, as I propose with my new internationally binding instrument. And that does not necessarily have to mean that states have to disclose all information about the weapon systems that they are developing or acquiring, but rather on the standards that they employ in order to determine which weapon is lawful, acceptable under international humanitarian law and which is not. But as you rightly point to, it's always difficult to get certain states at the negotiation table, and it will be in this case as well. But I'm hoping for the awareness of our collective interest and international security. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. So I have another question for Jakob. It's from Alexei Drew of King's. Given the European Union's cyber diplomacy toolkit, which builds a lot of capability for cooperative attribution and further measures as a response to cyber attacks, do you think it can still be seen as a neutral actor?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's more of a neutral actor if thinking of the context between maybe the US, Russia, and China than those three countries are to each other or in each other's views. That's as well why I thought it best to leave out attribution of my proposal, since that's quite a political act. And so I think excluding that, you're trying to eliminate these potential political conflicts that could come in the way of reaching an agreement.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. A question for Thomas from Chloe Barry. With the increasing presence of the private sector in space, could there be scope for private activities in space, such as tests for industrial activities, such as mining, to undermine the commitment by states not to add to space debris?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the big concerns on the civil side of the space community, that all these activities that are being proposed and undertaken are exacerbating the space debris problem. I mean, like, for example, I'm very worried about the fact that Elon Musk is proposing to put 40,000 new satellites in orbit. That's exactly what we don't need. But tests weapons tests do present a particular threat, largely because when you blow something up, debris has a tendency to go all over the place. And that's one of the reasons why, for example, the predictions from the Indian test didn't bear out in the way that they thought they would, because when you blow something up, you don't control where the debris necessarily goes. So it can cause problems all over the place.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Okay, we have reached the culminating point, I believe. I think the judges have reached their verdict, and I'm just going to have to look at my phone quickly to make sure I've got the right information in front of me. But I believe now, Heather, that I should be revealing the results, right? That's at this stage. Okay, she's nodding. Okay, there we go. So let me just quickly make a couple of notes here. So, without any further ado, the winner of the audience poll, so the audience favorite, was Haneen Khalid. Well done, Haneen. Big hand for the Haneen there. Fantastic. Receiving 41% of the vote. So, you know, you can be confident in your voting strength. So well done indeed, that's fantastic. The runner-up for arms control idol this year, the inaugural year, is John Tishman. Well done. Where is he? There you are, Jonathan. Well done. Fantastic. Well deserved. And without any further ado, and I haven't set a drum to do a drum roll, so I can do the on the end of my wooden table here. The winner this year of arms control idol is Thomas Cheney. Well done, Thomas. Ah, the look of shock on your face is a picture. Well done. Absolutely fantastic. Good result. And I think at this stage, I should probably hand over to Heather to say many thanks. I could probably say a few thanks. The first thing is, I guess, congratulations to everyone, all the people who put in an idea, to the finalists, obviously, and obviously to our winners today. Many thanks to our judges for spending all the time and effort on this, and also the mentors, of course, who shouldn't be forgotten about. And well done, really, to Heather and her team with coming up with such a great idea, for putting this together. All these things are a lot of hard work. I completely understand that. So to Emily, Isabel, Hannah, Sally, I could go on. Hope I don't miss anybody out there. And clearly to Heather too. This is also goodbye to Heather for 9 months for us at King's, because she's off to MIT, which is great for MIT, but not so great for us. But there we go. It's all part of her professional development. That's the way that I think we should look at it. So we'll miss you, Heather. And so I'll now hand back to you.
Thanks, Win. Huge congratulations to everybody. This was our first year. You never know how these things are going to go, but I think that you all just showed up with such creativity, and thank you to the judges. I was saying to the judges in the judges room, they come up with questions so fast, and for you all to field those as you did was just incredibly impressive. And yeah, just to echo Win, thank you, Win, for doing this. Thank you to the team, to all the finalists. We will be in touch with you just about next steps. And also we want to get your feedback about how you found the process, as we hope to be doing this going forward. I had promised we would end by 4:30. We are indeed ending by 4:30. And so with that, I think we will finish up. And just a final congratulations to all 5 of you. Seriously, this was so impressive, and you all did incredibly well, and I'm really glad that we got to this point, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we all did. So thank you to the finalists, and I can't see any of the participants, but we know that you're out there, the people who called in, and thank you so much for coming in. I think we had over 100 attendees who got involved, and so that was just really, really great to see that this got as much support as it did. And so with that, we'll wrap it up. Bye, everybody.
Well done, Heather.
Thanks, Win.